So we are here today with Harmen Brenninkmeijer. He has worked as operator, supplier, and executive at several leading companies in the gaming industry for almost 30 years. He's currently the managing director of the global chain and investment and management company that comprises Dynamic Partners and the Gaming Incubator, among others. And he's the CEO of Quanta, also part of the global chain. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us, Harmen. Maybe you can mention and delve into the effects the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the gaming industry, and maybe you can use an outlook of these effects varying between gaming jurisdictions such as Europe, where you have worked so many years, and now Asia and the US and Latin. Maybe you can spot some trends and difference between this impact of the pandemic in these jurisdictions?
Well, I mean, it's kind of an interesting situation since I'm based in Hong Kong and therefore very close to, let's say, where it all started. So I've been able to watch quite a few things, and obviously Hong Kong having the experience of SARS out of the years 2002, 2003, they learned a lot and they reacted very, very fast. China reacted very fast. You could see that where suddenly they closed the whole city of Wuhan, with over 20 million people being curtailed in their movements. Very unusual. The rest of the world thought that was nonsense, or that was, something that shouldn't be done like that. But as a result, I think it saved a lot of lives. But at what cost? Obviously, at a very great cost. But, when you start evaluating that today with what Asia did versus what Europe did, after the fact, after it all started in Italy, etc., and people reacted a bit later, but still somehow it got a bit better contained, other than probably the hotspots of Italy and Spain, moving over to the United States, where obviously it started to run out of control, where it just became very difficult to keep people in line. And then in Latin America, where a number of some governments have done a fantastic job. Colombia is a good example, where Brazil has done virtually no job, and as a result, you see the disaster. For the gaming industry, that has a lot of ramifications. I mean, we're a 24/7 industry. Perennially, we, are open for business at all times. And for the first time, we're not. That, of course, had a major impact into the business. You saw that in Macau. In Macau, we got, shut down on February the 4th. And then it reopened on February the 15th. So it was only shut down for 11 days, but that was because they immediately came up with very stringent, let's say, instructions as to how they were able to reopen. The rest of the world hasn't paid attention to that. The rest of the world basically said, we close you down, and then we close you down, and again, and again, and again. In other words, it just went on. I don't think that was the way to go. I think the governments have, in certain ways played a very good role. They have done and taken measures, let's say within the area of containment, and in many other areas they haven't, because the instructions, and specifically instructions to the gaming industry, have been very haphazard. And I think that that's where Asia has been a lot better. But again, you can't say all in Asia, because yes, it has been good in let's say certain jurisdictions, South Korea, for example, Singapore and Hong Kong, meaning Macau, not Hong Kong, of course. But that is not the case in the Philippines. In the Philippines, it was also far more haphazard. So all of this, basically comes down to concluding that the industry needs to be far better prepared in the future for something else that's going to happen. Because without a doubt, no matter if it's going to be a second wave or it's going to be another, let's say, infectious disease, we need to be ready. How? That's going to be the question. And how are we going to cooperate together into coming up with some guidelines that are going to work for all? So if I would have to give a 0 to 10, overall, let's say, grade to how the industry acted, I think the industry acted much better than effectively the regulators or the people that really rule the industry did. So, I'd say an 8 versus a 6. And I'd be interested to basically see how we can do better in the future, and how we can take measures together to make sure that we're much better prepared.
Right. What are the specific trends triggered by this global crisis, the lockdown for instance, regarding the sports betting industry boom, and maybe others you can think of. What do you think that will happen with these trends after we come out of the crisis?
Well, I think a lot of new things, let's say, have been created as such. I think from an esports perspective, I think there are a lot of issues there. Most of for esports positive. But if we talk about something that's positive, in other words, that esports is being promoted, correctly, a lot more people play and a lot more people became familiar with the sports. I think that's all good. Where I think the issues are going to be is naturally, how do you contain this into, the issue of match fixing, the issue of, let's say, the problematic areas of esports still need to be regulated correctly, etc. I was very surprised that Nevada ruled very, very quickly into allowing wagering to be taken on certain esports. I think that was great. I think in generally it's great that, let's say, esports is getting more out there. I think where we still need to see a lot of collaboration is between the esports publishers, esports in general, and let's say the companies that effectively facilitate the betting onto, let's say, esports. So for our industry as a whole, I think it was a massive move forward into exposure, into, let's say, people becoming more familiar with the industry, placing the bets, and as a result, understanding, let's say, the games better. I still think that there is a lot of steps to be taken in order to, get the various stakeholders involved in conversations to make it much more of an interesting proposition in the years to come. If we look at others, I think online gaming in general, I think the governments have reacted quite interestingly. Some of them, more positive than others. Some of them basically put a lot of restrictions on, which to a certain extent are understandable. Others did less. I think in generally what we all agree to is that, it's here to stay. I think online gaming is going to be a massive industry for with a much greater expansion. And I think what has happened is that a lot of land-based casinos now start to realize that, well, we probably can't do without online gaming. Now, how they're going to get involved and which steps they're going to be taken, that's still to be questioned. And that, of course, depends upon the regulations and the jurisdictions. I think it's very important that there is speed to be gotten, let's say, from their management in order to say, okay, we need to move on this, and we need to move on this in a way that, we're not going to get caught again into a situation where suddenly we have zero turnover if you're purely land-based. And then, of course, when you start looking at the type of games, I believe that the online games in generally are a little bit more simple than, let's say, the land-based games. I think that for a lot of gamblers, they now have gotten a taste of simpler games. I'm interested to see what the ramifications are going to be going forward. If a lot of people will go back to, let's say, the slots where there are more complicated games, more interesting games, more, let's say, feature-rich games, or if they're going to, be happy enough with some of the games that are being offered online. I think for sports, you will see much more online exposure, and I think virtual sports, and I think in certain other areas you will see that even live games. I think that live gaming in general, if people have been exposed to it during this pandemic, they will become more enthusiastic at playing it via their phones and via their computers versus what they did before by just going to the casino. On the other hand, you've seen in the United States when casinos reopened, suddenly there was a boom of, let's say, business. A lot of people walked in. Overall, certain casinos had a lot of uptake, and basically, their customers came back, and we'll see how that, develops over the months to come. And, depending on how the pandemic develops in those regions, and specifically what the impact is going to be. But I think it's also quite interesting to see how many people will go online and will start playing different games. Let's say in a more safe environment that they would like to call their home, or particular areas where they would like to be together. So it's going to be interesting to see what that's going to do. What I would like to see, which I don't think is going to happen too soon, but in an ideal world, I would like to see areas see it as a coffee casino. In other words, where having a cup of coffee, you can play your own games in a very controlled environment. So you can do it without having to be at home or without having to be in the casino, but you can do it at a coffee shop, but they need to get special permissions. So in other words, they need to have certain, internet accesses, and that people can play into certain areas where actually they could have let's say more exposure. They could learn different games, as well as they could ask questions. They could top up, on their, for example, e-wallet or on the digital accounts, etc. And I think that would be quite interesting to see a development like that. I haven't seen it yet. You can see e-game cafes in, for example, the Philippines, and you can see in certain areas where certain things are possible. I'd like to see it in a different way, where you can effectively find an internet cafe in a land-based location. And then, of course, I think the casinos itself will definitely have to change to a certain extent. I think people will demand more space. I think between machines, between let's say the seats at the table for the time being. And if that's not already regulated, and specifically if screens are being put between the players, etc. But I'd imagine that going forward, the casinos will start taking this in consideration into the designs. So I think that you will see some changes there. And I also think that people want to play more together while they're in the casino, etc. In a tournament environment, or with, let's say, community games that they can play together. And I think that you will see more growth there. So there will definitely be a certain impact. Another one that you can think of is, how much business are the restaurants still going to get for the time being again, or in the longer run? Even if there is a vaccine, will people still have the same demands as they did previously? It's just going to be interesting to see what the impact, the lasting impact, is going to be on the basis of a change of mind. I think a lot more people are thinking about who they are, what they want to do, where they want to be, how they want to behave. I think people are becoming more health conscious. They exercise more, this and that, etc. And I think that's going to have an impact on gaming in general.
And can you mention any other opportunities in terms of innovation in emerging technologies which you work a lot in the case of blockchain and AI? Is there any growth potential amid this context and looking ahead in the long term?
Yeah, I think you will see a number of different, let's say, growth areas. I mean, I think you will see growth areas in, as I mentioned previously a little bit, the type of games, community games. I think that you will see that when people play online, and generally a lot of people are sitting around the table and then play games together. You see that a lot in esports, even if they play different esports. They don't necessarily play against one another. In certain cases they do. I do feel that there needs to be much more of a community element into the games offered. That also will happen into online casinos. So I think you will see a lot there. I think that games have to be much more linked together, in which people can, if I play a game and my friend plays a game, then if I hit the bonus round, he can automatically be part of the bonus round when we are in a particular cycle. It's a bit like, playing the same table in a poker room, or playing the same table in a, on a blackjack, or whatever the case might be. So I think you will see certain areas of community games and an increase of tournaments, let's say, being demanded by players. I also think that the older players are becoming far more savvy now to pick up a digital device and play. Everybody always said, they're not going to play. My grandpa's not going to play. My grandma's not going to play, etc. Well, suddenly they're ordering food, and suddenly they're, taking an Uber or a Lyft, or whatever the case might be, and suddenly everybody becomes much more savvy onto their devices. And I think that it becomes inevitable that people are going to be demanding far more from their devices. That also means that when you walk, let's say you're a loyalty member of a particular casino, you expect them to communicate with you through your device much better than they did before. I think you will pick up the messages better. I think you want to see better promotional actions. I think you want to, have more of an interaction with, let's say, the hosts in the casino, etc., that they communicate with you, that they chat with you, etc. Even, I mean, who doesn't know how to work WhatsApp, right? And as a result, I think you will see that being demanded from casinos to have that level of communication directly with their customers and their players. So I think what's going to happen is that from an AI perspective, you got to be far more on the ball in order to understand your database and really cater to the database in ways that you have never done before. And I think that you can bypass a couple of steps nowadays where I'll give you the example of Nigeria. We have an operation in Nigeria, and you can see that very, very people that you would never expect picking up the mobile phone to do certain things are now picking up the mobile phone and do everything. So I think that for most people, the mobile phone is becoming their key device. And if I then take it a step further into the blockchain area, I think the following is happening. I'm working with Quanta, which we started with the blockchain lottery. And as we did the blockchain lottery, we then started to think, okay, now people can play the lottery, but we need a license in every country. I want to be able to expose people to a e-wallet first. I want to be able to expose people to, let's say, a KYC type application first. I want to have people be able to store key data for themselves on their phone, that if, let's say, their house burns down or their phone gets lost, etc., it is somewhere in the cloud, but it's on the blockchain. So only they have access, not anybody else, not us, not, let's say, the operator itself or whoever. It is purely there to be retrieved when permitted. And I think that's going to be quite interesting in order to create a lot of trust and to create new applications that people haven't thought of before. So we are working very hard in this direction in order to create applications that just give a bit more security to people on their devices. And that if something happens, let's say COVID-19, God forbid, hits you, and nobody knows you, and then suddenly, they want to come to you, and they basically want to ask you, all kinds of health questions, or for example, none of your family members are around, etc. Then there should be an application on your phone that's certainly accessible, with certain permissions to, let's say, healthcare providers that you maybe already have, provided permission to previously via a particular system. That as a result, there is access to your data, and as a result, they can deal with you much faster and more efficiently, as well as more economically. So I think there are a lot of applications that I can think of that are going to see the light of day nowadays that, a lot of people would think, oh, that's in the future. No, it's not in the future, it's there today, and we're working on it.
I'm interested in having your insights and knowledge about this, how to deal with unregulated markets and amid this context, especially, and also a mention about what could be going on with illegal gaming markets and problem gambling also. So I don't know if you can share your view on these areas.
Well, let's start with problem gambling. I think problem gambling is definitely something that everybody has to pay attention to. I don't think that anybody should be there in order to basically get as much money from their player as possible in the shortest period. I think that we all realize that when you have a player, you want to make sure that the player is there for a much longer period. You don't want to burn him very quickly. So I think it is to everybody's benefit to basically allow the player to make a number of settings, no matter if that is a land-based casino or that's online. Online, it's quite simple to do, right? Okay, so you can say, for example, how much do you want to lose today? Theoretically, you could ask a player every day that question. And then the player can fill in a number, and that's the number. And if he thinks, oh my God, he's in the middle of a cycle and he wants to play harder or more, he can't, because he has given himself that limit. There are many ways to go about it, and I think that's one thing that we need to move forward on, and everybody needs to take place in, has to take part in, because it is not something that if we don't do it, somebody else will do it, right? Then we will be pushed into being regulated, and then generally that never is for the better. UK is a good example. Suddenly everything is allowed and then nothing is allowed. I mean, it's always these extremes, right? We don't want to work with extremes. We want to work within a self-policing type of environment in which we do the right thing as operators. And I think that basically means that operators, as well as all of the suppliers, platform providers, etc., need to work into this direction and provide, everything that's needed for this. That's number one. Number two, when you start talking about illegal gaming, Yeah, I can talk about this for hours. Illegal gaming, I think, will, has been around, will be around because most of the people do not know or do not want to deal with it. So if we talk to a lot of governments, and I have a lot of experience with that as, from my past position as being the chairman of the European Gaming Organization and having a lot of, let's say, connections to regulators across the world, it is very, very difficult to get a lot of regulators to basically persuade their politicians. It's often not the regulator, it's the politicians that really don't want to deal with these issues. Brazil is a great example, right? I mean, we've been talking for years now about getting regulations in Brazil, and it's still not happening, even though everybody knows that in Brazil, the online gaming scene is very vibrant, they're very profitable. So, but the Brazilian government doesn't get nothing out of it, and it's utterly ridiculous. India is not a great example where, there is massive amounts of play happening in these countries, and the government get nothing. And I can continue, right, across the globe. So what needs to happen is, I believe, and again, this is one of those very difficult issues, is the industry needs to sit together and basically create call it a global gaming association that effectively collects enough data on where gaming is implemented and regulated proper, that data can be shown to countries where it's not. And I think that the politicians, because every country has politicians that are pro and against gaming, and most of the politicians that are against are in power, and they don't want to deal with the questions at this moment because it weakens their position. So the only way to deal with it is by having, people being properly informed. And the only way to do that is by having an association that is being seen as neutral. That's not just run by operators, but that's run by experts from around the industry in all the different facets of the activities we have. So from people that are regulating it, to the people that are representing it from a legal perspective, to the people that are supplying the product, developing the product, and the people that are obviously operating the business, so that we can really make a point across in order to deal with it. Other than that, illegal gaming is going to be around. It is very, very difficult for any government to stop any illegal gaming. When you have a good legal gaming scene, it works, right? So France, Spain, good examples where the illegal gaming scene was very vibrant, but then suddenly it became legal, and then everybody switches. Why not? Because it's much easier to deal with a legal gaming operator, that's fully licensed, etc., than to deal with somebody that you don't know, where they're based, and if there is an issue, who to approach. So overall, I think, that is a key aspect. The other key aspect is the fact that, as is happening today, and Americans are very good at that, is basically if you're working in an unregulated market and you want to go to the United States, for example, and get a license, in generally you can't, because they basically say, no, you're operating in that market, you want to operate in our market, you need to be out of that market. So the more people do that, the more countries follow that principle, the better it will be for the world in order to take out illegal gaming. But it will take a long time before that really takes a hold firmly across the world, if we don't get more countries on board with some level of regulatory control built into their laws.
Well, I think we can also talk about the gaming startups in general. What is the landscape that they are facing now when you want to venture on this project in the gaming industry, and what are the resources, the opportunities that they have across the gaming jurisdictions? What will be the landscape for them right now?
I've dealt a lot with startups, right, and with many startups, and a startup in gaming is very, very challenging for several reasons. Number one reason, of course, is that, first of all, your industry isn't that big, right? So in other words, the number of customers that you potentially can have isn't tens of thousands or something. We're talking about B2B now for a minute versus a B2C operation. If you're a B2C operator, okay, fine, you can go into a country and you could go after, let's say the public within that country. But trying to take away the business from the incumbents is very, very complicated, very difficult, and takes a lot of money. So between, let's say, the fact that you need to focus and zero in on your product and make sure that your product is so unique that as a result, you have a place in the industry, then simultaneously network your way into it well enough in order to have, let's say, the bandwidth and the speed of implementing your product, in addition to them making sure that the regulators are accepting it across the board, and that you basically have the financial whereabouts in order to make it all happen. Very, very complicated to get it all straight. So what I often say is that startups need to be in some kind of an acceleration environment. They need to come up with a product, and then they need to link themselves into some kind of a hub infrastructure where they work with people that understand the industry inside out, that are truly well networked, and that at the same token understand what happens in all different areas of the world. So they can just gain from that knowledge quickly, and then basically focus all their attention to let's say, the things that are key. I think that of all the startups that I've been dealing with, etc., I think less than 1 in 10 is somewhat making it work, and less than 1 in 50 is becoming successful. So it's very, very complicated. At the same token, I would never give up, and I would advise anybody that has a good idea to go ahead with it. Just surround yourself with the right, let's say, mentors in the different facets of the industry in order to move ahead quickly and not to waste any time and money trying to get to know the industry, because I've dealt quite a bit with people that said, oh, but they should be thinking like this. Oh, the industry should be doing like that. Oh, I think that, this industry, they don't know anything about technology, or they are far too conservative, or, the regulations are too tough. Yeah, they are. So you need to have people that know their ways around in order to make it still happen. So I would say it's a more difficult industry for a startup than most other industries, not all clearly, but it is. It's not an industry that you shouldn't necessarily not want to get into. You just have to be very astute of let's say, all of the measures that you need to take in order to make it work.
I think we can finish off with if you want to mention another. Other topics, other areas you're working at the global chain that you haven't already discussed, and maybe a little about the Asian markets now you're working there. Your experience, your learnings in those jurisdictions. I don't know which one to take.
Thanks. So I came to Asia because in 2013 I thought China was a great opportunity for the lotteries, and I believed that at that stage the China government basically has said to the National Welfare Lottery as well as the Sports Lottery, okay, we're going to give you some extra means and opportunity to basically expand the business. Then they did a purge of, let's say, the corruption that apparently went on within the lotteries, which clearly was the case, as they prosecuted over 100 people, and a number of them, were sentenced to death. So basically that opportunity was shot. And even up to today, 2020, Xi Jinping hasn't really opened up the lottery market in China too much. Hasn't done anything related to the online business, and I believe is looking at how to basically control the business and simultaneously grow the business. So I think he still has a master plan, but different people are implementing it, and I think it's quite convoluted and not let's say on target. So that basically left me with going and look at the Philippines. Obviously, I thought that the BOGO initiatives were a good idea. But it becomes quite difficult when you have the big behemoth of China, to which most people are focused via BOGO licenses, interfering. So I think overall, as you could have seen with Cambodia was suddenly exploding, because as long as you had a land-based casino license, you could effectively operate an online gaming, and then you could direct your attention to wherever you felt like. So again, a lot of let's say attention was focused onto the Chinese market, and obviously those are gray areas, and those are areas where you're very vulnerable. So the Chinese government hit back, and basically they closed down. As a result, no online gaming from Cambodia allowed. So Asia is difficult. We see some opportunities in of course Japan with the IRs, but again we've seen the difficulty of just getting some basic regulations through, and the demands and requirements are very, very steep. So we'll have to see as to how successful that actually will be in the end. I still believe in it, but at the same token, I'm reserved. I think overall that Asia is a complex market. It is too much a gray market, and I think that more attention needs to be focused by the governments to create regulations that just work for everybody and that are controllable. So it's going to be interesting to see how that will develop in the years to come. So I'll try to sit on the regulatory friendly side in order to figure out how we as the global chain can play a part. But meanwhile, we're just focused on companies that basically have solutions and opportunities in areas of the world where we can supply product or push product into let's say via developments that I think are going to be needed. And initially we're going to focus on markets where we can place those products. I'm at the moment quite Africa centric, very much looking at the opportunities that are offered there under regulatory controls. And I think that with a lot of product developed there, we can take that product back into other areas of the world because of the fact that there is more room to maneuver and to test and to try and to experiment. And I think that's quite important in order to figure out which products will work where, how, and for who. And I think that's my focus at the moment in order to do so with Quanta specifically. We are on the blockchain and we have a lot of blockchain solutions. And what we would like to do is become the blockchain solutions provider to the gaming industry in various ways, that we can come up with solutions that I think make people far more comfortable in not being completely dependent on a centralized massive system, but decentralizing a number of actions. So for example, the QSeal, which is the KYC information part, or the Quanta Pay, which is effectively the e-wallet, or let's say the QFold, where a number of, let's say, the documents can be stored with a variety of data that might be required, etc. And I think that we have many other solutions or ideas outside the gaming industry related to health, e-commerce, technology. But I think this one, education, but this one I think is very specific to the gaming industry, where we want to find those niches, come up with modules that I think other online operators can implement today. And I think that my view on gaming is that gaming is going to be hurt for a number of years. I think the money in gaming is going to be not as rich as it used to be. And I think therefore you have to be extremely targeted with whatever product you want to develop or venture you want to undertake.
Thank you very much for your time and all the insights. I hope we'll see you in further opportunities with Shogunet.
Thank you.
Best of luck with all your projects.
I look forward to be able to travel again. But thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And anytime somebody has a question and wants an opinion, then I'm happy to give it.